Welcome to the series that takes you to the heart of America, revealing the systems that keep our country working as you have never seen them before. The hidden worlds that keep us on the move, our shelves stocked, and our factories running. All that you see here would grind to a halt, even disappear, without the one critical network that makes our modern lives possible. Energy! It's what keeps our lights on and our homes heated. Americans, on average, are the biggest consumers of energy on the planet, and keeping it flowing is a massive undertaking. Over the next hour, we'll see how the vast American energy machine powers us all. I'll make a great loop around the country, discovering where our energy comes from, how we harness it, how we waste it, and how we get it to every home and workplace in the nation. What does it take to tap into the rich energy reserves hidden right beneath our feet?
That's the natural gas.
That's the gas. And capture a power source 300 feet up in the air. I'm not gonna look down. No looking down. We'll find out why we have to go to extremes to heat our homes and power our lives.
If this wasn't here, you'd have a lot of cold, angry people.
Cold and angry, and also in the dark.
In the dark.
We'll use cutting-edge technology to get an amazing new look at how the system delivers and how it's being pushed to the limits.
I never saw so much energy loss happening everywhere you look.
We're consumers, literally, from the time we're born to the time we die.
This is a story of where and how we get our energy today and what it tells us about our energy future. This is America Revealed. America Revealed is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. There's nothing else like it in America. 200,000 fans have descended on Central Florida for the great American race. There's an energy capital of America today. This is it. My name is Yul Kwan. I spent my life studying people, technology, and infrastructure, and the larger networks they create. So for me, today isn't just another day at the races. It's a high-octane opportunity to explore the vast network that provides America with energy. Because if there's one spectacle that's all about our insatiable thirst for raw power, it's the Daytona 500.
Correct.
With their powerful engines, these cars will burn through nearly 10,000 gallons of gasoline, tearing around the track.
But that's just one small piece of the energy puzzle I see all around me.
You see the loudspeakers and lights? The 7 massive jumbotrons? What about these beers? Keeping them cold, enough refrigerators to chill 200,000 drinks. Plus, there's all this TV equipment, broadcasting the race to 30 million viewers across America.
Think about it. All of these devices that make modern life possible have one basic thing in common. You've got to plug them into the wall.
Of course, it's not just Daytona. The whole country is hungry for electricity. From the smallest town to the biggest city, we can't live without our millions of refrigerators, air conditioners, and washing machines. But they represent just a small part of the power we use. Each of our homes is also jam-packed with, on average, 26 electronic devices. To keep the power on, we rely on what's been called the largest and most complex machine in the world. And it all started right here on Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan. On September 4th, 1882, visionary inventor Thomas Edison switched on America's first central power plant, delivering electricity to 400 electric bulbs in less than 1 square mile of the city. It's the starting point for the remarkably intricate system of generating stations and transmission lines that light up our world today.
Edison said, "Where this thing is going to stop, Lord only knows." 130 years later, we're still relying on the constantly evolving machine that not only powers this light bulb, but our very way of life.
Once Edison flipped the switch, other power plants quickly came online from coast to coast. The birth of our modern electric power grid. By 1890, 200 American cities, including New Orleans, Detroit, and St. Louis, all had their first electric streetcars. By 1925, Chicago was the most electrified city in the world. Soon, long-distance power lines connected these isolated systems, creating one massive network. Today, more than 200,000 miles of high-tension transmission lines supply power. They are the delivery system at the heart of our grid. Most of the time, the grid is so reliable, we barely even notice it's there. But it's increasingly being pushed to the breaking point, as millions dramatically discovered one summer afternoon in 2003.
August 14th was just a routine day. All the conditions were normal. We had most of our transmission lines in service.
From this control room in Albany, New York, Rick Gonzalez monitors a grid throughout New York State.
Normally, the big board tells the operators at a glance what transmission lines are available, and typically it's not lit up. So we had no indication. On that day, all hell broke loose. The big board lit up like a Christmas tree, indicating that almost all the transmission lines had been lost in New York.
And what are you thinking? What's the first thing in your head?
There was no way this could be real. It must be a mistake. The system went from reliable to total chaos in less than 5 seconds.
The blackout that rolled across New York began as a minor incident 450 miles to the west.
It all started in Ohio. A transmission line sagged into a tree that was growing under it, and because action wasn't taken, about 30 transmission lines ended up tripping or being lost. That resulted in a tremendous surge of power. It overloaded our transmission lines and effectively caused a blackout in New York.
Basically, it was like a domino effect. One line goes down, forcing power onto other lines. They get overloaded, they go down, and it just cascades from there.
The region stricken by this power outage is enormous. Here in New York City, the only thing to do was walk.
It went from information center of the world to no phone service, no computers, no cell phones.
It was really a safety and a security issue. 80% of the people in New York State were left without power immediately following the blackout. 8 states were affected. 40 million in the U.S. altogether.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think that one overgrown tree could bring down the entire system. 40 million Americans without power because someone forgot to trim a tree.
Nearly a decade has passed since that epic blackout. And since then, the grid's basic infrastructure hasn't really changed. To keep it from crashing down again, we rely on a hidden army whose soldiers put their lives on the line every single day.
And today in New Jersey, I'm along for the ride.
Ryan Hill and pilot Vinny Karsha work for the state's largest utility, PSENG.
The part of the wire that we're going through today, if that goes down, what happens? What's the impact?
If one line goes down, it puts extra stress on the system to pick up that line. They service up to 400,000 people, customers. Today we're going out to a job where the conductor, the wire, got damaged either by a lightning strike or just being old and started corroding.
If the problem is left unchecked, the consequences could be devastating. And no one wants a repeat of the 2003 blackout.
We're right in between Philadelphia and New York City. And if something ever happened in between there with our lines, you know, they can have a cascading effect right into the city of New York. That's what we wanted to avoid. Well, that's why we do it live, so we keep that energy flowing.
That's right. These lines are live, still energized. And we're flying right at them in a big hunk of metal filled with jet fuel.
It's pretty intense stuff to be playing with. I'll bond right onto that circuit, and then we become energized.
The electricity is actually going around you.
Yeah, it's going around you, not through you.
This metal wand will put us and the helicopter in direct contact with the transmission line. Once Ryan bonds onto the circuit, the current will flow around us, and he can safely work on the line. But if the chopper touches anything else, like a tree or another power line, we could all be instantly electrocuted. $230,000 volts are surging around the helicopter. There's absolutely no room for error.
Right now, we're bonding on. You get a little dips on the skin, you know, electricity going around you.
You can feel it?
Yeah, you can feel it once in a while. You feel some vibration on your hands. You might feel the wire get warm once in a while.
Ryan carefully reinforces a line with these rods, forming a protective metal band-aid.
I'm going to cover up the bad spot of the wire. This way it doesn't keep on unraveling.
What do people say when you tell them what you do?
They think I'm nuts. You know, it's hard to explain exactly what you do, but you tell them you walk off the side of a helicopter and think you're crazy. You just want to get in there, do that job, and get the hell out of there as fast as you can.
Mission accomplished.
It's a huge responsibility to maintain the 1,200 miles that we have. It's a very rewarding feeling when you do the job.
Repair workers like Ryan and Vinny are on the front lines every day, maintaining the grid's complex delivery system. That's hard enough, but there's an even bigger challenge: how to keep it constantly supplied with electricity nationwide. These points of light represent a constellation of nearly 6,000 generating plants we count on to power the grid. And each one needs fuel so it can supply power 365 days a year. Today, they use a mix of energy sources, from nuclear to renewables like solar and wind, from hydro to natural gas. But these power plants produce more of our electricity than any other source. And they're still burning the same ancient fuel Edison turned to back in the 19th century.
Coal. This one critical resource supplies nearly half of America's electricity. And this is the biggest coal mining operation in the country. The Black Thunder Mine in Wyoming's Powder River Basin.
Black Thunder is one of 15 mines in the basin, which stretches from northeastern Wyoming into Montana. In the last 40 years, the area has been completely transformed. This is what the barren landscape looked like in the 1950s. And here it is now, the terrain completely altered by mines like Black Thunder. Today, Wyoming produces more coal than any state in the nation, far more than traditional coal mining locations like Kentucky and West Virginia. So what changed?
When you think about protecting the environment, the last thing that comes to mind is digging a giant coal mine in the middle of pristine ranch land. Yet, ironically, all this came about because of a government effort to clean up our air over 40 years ago.
The environmental crusader who led the charge is the last person you might expect.
We can no longer afford to consider air and water common property, free to be abused by anyone.
With pressure from the growing environmental movement, President Richard Nixon signed the Clean Air Act of 1970 into law. It restricted emissions released into the air by big polluters like coal-fired power plants. You might think that would have killed coal mining, but not here in Wyoming. This stuff has a lot less sulfur than the coal mined elsewhere, so it burns cleaner, making the Powder River Basin the new king of coal. Josh Gardner drives one of the trucks that work these pits. It's a 6:30 a.m. shift change. Time to go to work.
Hey, morning, Josh. Hey, what's up? Hey, good to see you.
Our ride is basically a dump truck on steroids. It stands over 2 stories tall and weighs almost 200 tons. But it seems dwarfed by the shovel at the base of the pit.
That's our first bucket in.
It felt like a small earthquake.
This actually is telling us how much weight we have on there. The first bucket was 68 tons, and then the second one, 60.
It looks like it's raining coal.
So we got 174.
3 bucketfuls, and we're on our way. 1 truckload like this can produce enough energy to heat a home for more than 40 years, or run your television for the next 2,000 years. All day long, Josh drives in a big loop, filling his truck with coal, dumping it, filling it up again. In a single shift, he can haul 8,000 tons. And there's plenty to haul. Typically, coal seams might be 10 feet thick, but here, they're 80 feet thick or more.
We're about 200 feet down, and you can see the definite line where the black starts up there and all the gray above it. And once we get done taking all the coal out of this seam, and this shovel's done, then they'll take all the dirt that sits above it, they'll blast it back down into this hole, and then they'll just start again.
Again and again until the whole thing is cleared of all the coal.
Correct.
And how long can you do that for? How much coal is there?
They say in the whole Powder River Basin, there's enough coal to last 150 years.
So this place will be around a lot longer than you or me.
Oh, yeah.
But digging it up may be the easiest part of the job. We're hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from the power plants that need it. So how to get this coal where it needs to go? Trains. But not just any trains. Some of them are 1.5 miles long. Carlin Vigil schedules the trains at Black Thunder. She's worked here nearly 30 years, almost as long as the mine has been in business.
We shipped our first train in December of 1977, and we were probably only loading a couple of trains a week at that time, and now you're looking at, anywhere from 20 to 25 trains a day.
This train is headed to a power plant in Montana. This one is on its way to Minnesota, Illinois, or Missouri. This one as far east as Georgia or New York. And they all start out on the Joint Line. This 103-mile-long set of tracks has developed into the busiest stretch of rail in the entire country. It links these trains to national rail lines, so the coal can get wherever it needs to go. The trains don't even stop as they roll under the chutes at the base of the towers.
The coal runs right up this conveyor belt here, this tube that's down below us. Goes into the silos themselves. We can load a train out of here in about 1 hour and 20 minutes. Generally, a good month is over 10 million tons of coal.
10 million tons of coal sounds like it's a big number, but what does that mean in terms of how much energy it's actually giving to the United States?
It's actually 10% of the coal-generated fuel for the United States.
In the middle of nowhere, we've built ourselves the Grand Canyon of coal. With our vast reserves, it's no wonder America is still so reliant on the simple black rock to power the grid. Even though coal-fired power plants are among the biggest air polluters in the U.S. But not long ago, a new energy source was discovered that promised to transform how we make electricity.
A new landmark rises as power from a pioneer source begins to flood through the countryside. It is the nation's first privately financed and operated atomic power plant.
That's right, nuclear power.
Here is Dr. Atom. The nuclear reactor may be substituted where heat is now provided by coal or petroleum.
From the time the first commercial reactor came online in 1957, it's been promoted as a clean, safe, cheap energy source. A message delivered with a can-do optimism.
The future supplying of electric power to entire cities is far from impossible.
But how committed are we really to nuclear power today? To find out, I've traveled from Wyoming to the Watts Bar nuclear plant in Tennessee, where a single reactor has been operating since 1996. Deep inside the plant, an army of more than 3,000 workers is completing a second reactor, which will generate power for an additional 650,000 homes.
So this is the heart of the system right here.
This is the reactor building, and under the reactor head is where the nuclear fission takes place.
Brian Briotti is a construction manager here.
The difference between nuclear power and like the fossil fuels is we use fission to make heat, unlike coal burners where you burn coal or oil burners where you burn oil. The difference between a coal-fired plant and a nuclear plant is what you do to heat the water, turn it into steam, and run it back to the turbine building to turn a generator.
So basically all this is just a really fancy way to boil water.
It is, absolutely.
It's awe-inspiring to know that just below us, a controlled nuclear reaction will heat water in the core to nearly 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And it'll keep running for months at a time, shutting down only to refuel.
We're very fortunate that very few people, even in the industry, can walk up to a reactor head and be this close without it being shielded with lead. We're the only nuclear plant in the United States that's currently under construction.
In fact, this reactor will be the first one to come online in more than 15 years. In 1974, President Nixon projected that America would have 1,000 nuclear plants by the beginning of the 21st century. He wasn't even close. Today, there are just 104 nuclear plants in operation. So what happened? For one thing, construction costs have skyrocketed. There's also the risk of catastrophe.
An accident at a nuclear power plant. A feedwater pump broke down this morning, automatically shutting down the 3 Mile nuclear power plant.
3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and most recently, Fukushima. They're all chilling reminders of what can happen when an accident at a nuclear plant spirals out of control, potentially leading to a dangerous release of radioactivity. No new American plants have even been ordered since 1978. Watts Bar's Unit 2 reactor is the only nuclear plant under active construction here today, finishing a job that started in 1972.
This is the actual Unit 2 control room, and we'll be operating this commercial operation a little over a year.
I met up with Adam Scales, the operations manager at Watts Bar, to ask him the question that's been on my mind all day.
This reactor, when it comes online, is going to be the first reactor in the 21st century. Is this just the first step, or is this pretty much the end of the road?
No, I see this as just a first step. We can't afford the public to lose confidence in what we do. We're very concerned that the public understands what we do, and we're not just protecting the plant, but them.
Adam may seem confident, but building a new plant today is a harder sell than ever before. Besides Watts Bar, only 2 other plants have even broken ground. They're still years away from generating electricity. In the meantime, our demand for energy keeps going up. For decades, nuclear and coal have been the traditional, stable workhorses that power the grid. But we're increasingly turning to a fossil fuel that's seen as both safer and cleaner. Natural gas. Newly discovered fields in the U.S. led to a boom in the 1950s, driven by growing industrial and consumer needs. The expansion of our underground gas pipeline system was fast-tracked just to keep up. It's an engineering marvel that can stretch around the Earth 12 times. But even this isn't enough to deliver gas to every corner of America. Which is why this behemoth, 3 football fields long, is arriving in Boston after a 5-day journey from gas-rich Trinidad. This is the Neptune. Its cargo is kept at a bone-splintering minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, natural gas is transformed into liquefied natural gas, or LNG, 600 times smaller in volume. Her final destination is Everett Terminal. Frank Cadillac manages the facility, keeping Boston fully supplied with natural gas.
Domestic gas is produced primarily in the Gulf Coast, and we're about as far away as you can get from those producing fields.
You guys are the last to get natural gas if it's coming through the pipes. And everyone else is taking the gas.
And everybody else is taking gas along the way. All the big cities in the Northeast, all those places are taking the gas before it gets to Boston. In the really cold days, sometimes there isn't much left.
In Massachusetts, nearly half the homes use gas for heating in addition to electricity. In the dead of winter, when furnaces are cranked up high, there's simply not enough gas coming through the pipes to go around.
Why isn't it an option just to build out more pipes?
To build a pipeline 1,500 miles, 2,000 miles, and only use it a few days of the year, that's not really economical. It would cost billions and billions of dollars to build additional pipeline capacity, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
So to supplement the gas coming through the pipeline, Boston relies on tankers like the Neptune. For now, there's simply no other way to get it here.
Think of this tanker as a giant freezer full of concentrated bottled energy. Getting it safely into Boston is no simple task. But as you can see, we're not alone.
Security is tight. We're passing within a mile of downtown.
When we started bringing these ships in 40 years ago, we always had an escort around the vessel. In those days, it was more safety-oriented.
George Lee is a veteran docking pilot. He's guided LNG tankers into Boston's inner harbor more than 150 times. These massive ships are coming here from Trinidad, but also from Egypt and Yemen.
After 9/11, the security issues have come into play, so there's even more assets out there keeping a buffer zone around the ship to keep all other vessels and people away from the ship while it's coming in.
Getting a massive tanker like this into a busy port like Boston requires tugboats, coast guards, helicopters, a whole crew. But it all comes down to these guys who are the quarterbacks.
Justice, easy 90 to port.
George and the ship's captain have to execute the biggest parking job I've ever seen while backing the tanker under the Tobin Bridge. The clearance can be as little as 5 feet. It's a maneuver that city planners clearly didn't have in mind when the bridge was built over a half-century ago.
I noticed that we're turning away from our destination. Why are we doing that?
So that when the vessel's finally moored at the dock, it's bow out, which makes departure and an emergency easier.
3 hours after it entered Boston Harbor, the Neptune is safely docked, and George's job is finished for today. Over the next 24 hours, the gas will be carefully offloaded. These critical shipments replenish the pipes and fuel New England's largest gas-fired power plant, conveniently located right next to the dock.
So if this wasn't here, you'd have a lot of cold, angry people.
We'd have a lot of people cold and angry, and also in the dark.
Tomorrow, the Neptune heads back to Trinidad to pick up another load of liquefied natural gas for the Northeast.
Like clockwork, LNG tankers come into Boston more than 60 times a year. But in terms of quenching our national thirst for energy, all this, just a drop in the bucket.
Especially since our love affair with natural gas is on the rise, and no wonder. It's the cleanest burning of our fossil fuels, and it's relatively cheap. To keep us supplied, we really need a secure, plentiful source right here at home. Penn State geologist Terry Engelder believes he's found one. He's taking me deep into the woods near Ithaca, New York, to show me.
Shale right here. Let me pop my skis off and get a sample of this. This is a piece of the shale right in here. I've broken it.
Okay.
Put that up to your nose.
Hey, it smells pretty good. It smells kind of sweet.
That's the natural gas.
That's the gas.
Terry's an expert on the gas found in a massive shale rock deposit called the Marcellus, which is buried thousands of feet directly below us. It extends south from New York through western Pennsylvania and beyond. For more than a century, people have known there was gas here, but they didn't know quite how much.
Boy, magnificent. Look at that.
Whoa, that's beautiful.
In 2008, Terry stunned the energy world when he estimated the size of the reserve in the Marcellus. He's brought along his notebook with the original calculations.
The results suggested that there was 500 trillion cubic feet.
500 trillion?
If Terry's right, and all this gas could be tapped, it could be enough to meet all of America's natural gas needs for more than 20 years.
This brought a lot of operators to the state of Pennsylvania.
So it became an old-fashioned gold rush.
A 21st century gold rush that really is big enough to affect America's energy portfolio.
We collected the GPS locations of all the shale gas rigs throughout the country, from the Barnett Shale in Texas, to the Fayetteville Shale in Arkansas, to the Woodford Shale, the Haynesville Shale, Eagle Ford, the Marcellus, and more. This rapid growth tells the story of just how widespread the gas rush has been. But to see how it's transformed the landscape, you've got to get closer, much closer. Here's a satellite photo of Boonville, a small farming community in western Arkansas, before the prospectors arrived. And this is how it looks today, a giant pincushion of drill sites.
Major gas shale deposits can be found in 28 different states. If you add them all up, you get a gas reserve that's even bigger than the world's largest oil reserve in Saudi Arabia. So what's the catch? How to get it safely out of the ground.
You've probably heard of the controversy around hydraulic fracturing, also called fracking. It uses millions of gallons of liquid pumped into the ground to fracture the rock and release the gas. Since the drilling began, it's been linked to everything from being able to light your kitchen tap on fire, to health effects in livestock and people, to environmental damage at the well sites.
The controversy largely comes because there have been some accidents spilled on the surface. For example, and the water does have additives in it.
Chemicals like benzene and diesel and hydrochloric acid.
That's right. And it also obtains some of the natural components of the rock. Some of these might be heavy metals, for example, that come back to the surface from the rock. So that obviously management of this water becomes really critical.
Questions have also been raised about how much gas can actually be retrieved from formations like the Marcellus. But that hasn't slowed down the industry's phenomenal growth. In the last 7 years, shale gas has gone from next to nothing to supplying 20% of our natural gas needs.
America was going to have to import more and more gas from overseas. Now, what the gas shale revolution has done is it's allowed America to think in terms of being energy independent, but that means going after this natural gas in somebody's backyard.
We're lucky that our nation has such vast energy resources. But how long before that luck runs out? In 1931, Thomas Edison confided to his friend Henry Ford, "We are like tenant farmers, chopping down the fence around our house for fuel, when we should be using nature's inexhaustible sources of energy, sun, wind, and tide."
The father of the grid recognized the danger of using finite resources to feed his creation. And we're still searching for clean, renewable sources of power to satisfy our boundless desire for electricity.
But unlike Edison, we've got some very impressive technology these days to help with the search. Each of these spinning points of light represents the readings from thousands of sensors. This is a high-tech treasure map for America's fastest-growing renewable resource: wind. Across the country, over 36,000 wind turbines dot the landscape. We converted the data produced by those sensors, revealing stunningly complex wind patterns sped up 10,000 times.
All of this data provides a picture of what the wind conditions and weather conditions are like across the country. With the new technologies that have been developed in the last 10 or 15 years, it's really become possible to predict with quite good accuracy how windy it's going to be at any location in the country.
In Albany, New York, I've come to see Dr. Michael Brower, who uses this mapping data to help identify new wind project sites.
Looking at the simulation, why are certain regions better for building wind projects than others?
The main wind project development area for the U.S. right now is in the Great Plains. Really a whole band from central Texas on up to the Dakotas. Almost all of this area is very windy most of the time. And there are also some nice terrain features in this area, hills, small ridges, mesas, and so forth, which help to concentrate the wind. The problem along the West Coast is that there are mountains which are blocking the path. And so the atmosphere looks for channels. One of the main gaps is the Columbia River Valley, which is the only sea level passage through the Cascade Mountains in the Pacific Northwest.
So the Columbia River Gorge is basically a funnel, and so all the wind shoots through that funnel, creating a wind superhighway.
Exactly, and in fact, that area has been a region of very active wind development.
I've come to the Columbia River Gorge myself to get a closer look at what's driving this phenomenal growth of wind power.
Today, the winds are calm, which is good news for me because I'm standing 300 feet off the ground. The only place to go from here is down.
At the Windy Flats Wind Farm, high above the Columbia, I've hooked up with a team of experts who are doing a safety check on this massive turbine.
Nice job, Yule. I'm not gonna look down. No looking down.
My life is literally hanging by a thread. Luckily, I'm up here with Randy Deputy, who knows exactly what he's doing.
Woo! This is crazy. I can't believe this is your job. How many times have you done this?
I have about 3,000 hours of rope access work.
So you've been dangling in this position for 3,000 hours of your life?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Randy's work takes him all around the country. He's one of 4,000 technicians who keep these high-tech turbines spinning.
So what are you looking for when you come down to inspect these blades?
For any damages in this outer coat, which is called a gel coat, it's kind of the protective layer that keeps the fiberglass safe from UV radiation.
Randy's job is to make sure the turbines work flawlessly. Each one is a self-contained power plant, generating enough electricity for more than 1,000 homes.
We'll do inspections to the leading edge of the blade because it's what breaks the wind. So any erosion on the blade, it's always going to start on the leading edge.
The view is surreal. Giant turbines stretching for more than 30 miles along the gorge. Some people call it an eyesore. Others call it a thing of beauty. For Randy, it's a career.
The wind farm started being developed in the Columbia River Gorge about 10 years ago. That was actually the second job my company ever worked on, was on that site when there was only 16 turbines in the entire region. And right now, it's 2,000.
So this whole area went from 16 turbines 10 years ago to about 2,000 right now. And is it continuing to grow?
On average, wind is growing 30% a year, every year.
But keeping up that pace could be tough. Many of the best untapped wind sites are far from existing transmission lines. Getting the power to customers is a challenge. But here in the Columbia River Gorge, there are already over 15,000 miles of transmission lines. The original network was built to serve the region's hydroelectric dams, which started going up in the 1930s. Now, these wind turbines can piggyback on the existing infrastructure. But most of this wind power isn't even being used in the Pacific Northwest. It's headed hundreds of miles due south to California, which already imports more electricity than any other state. California law mandates that by 2020, a third of its power must come from renewable energy sources. And Deborah Levine, who is responsible for bringing power to 30 million Californians, is already seeing the impact of this change.
What's going on with the renewables now?
It's exactly opposite of yesterday. The wind is at 140 megawatts. Yesterday, it was about 2,000 megawatts.
This brand new control room, which oversees most of the state's electric grid, is a first in the country to have a team devoted to deciphering the ups and downs of wind power. But there's a lot they simply can't control.
If the wind blows too hard, 50 miles an hour, the wind turbines stop.
That's so counterintuitive because you'd think that to have more wind power, you want more wind. And so then what happens?
We need to make it up. People still want their electricity. So we need to have fossil generation on standby, able to pick up to ensure that the demand is still served.
You actually have to have more conventional power sources online to pick up the slack if the wind dies.
We'll need something to pick up the slack if the wind dies. Mother Nature is always going to be Mother Nature. You can't count on it.
Over 30 states now have renewable energy targets. It's just one part of an ongoing fight to change how we consume energy. But it's a tremendous challenge, especially when we're losing the battle right in our homes. I'm high above Cleveland on a cold winter night. What I'm seeing reveals a lot about how we all waste power without even noticing.
We're over in a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland.
Larry Davis is a thermal mapping expert whose highly sensitive camera, mounted on the bottom of this plane, captures heat radiating from objects on the ground.
I would say that the majority of energy that's being wasted comes from everyday consumers like you or me in our houses. The orange and reddish colors indicate that there's a substantial amount of heat loss.
About half the homes in Cleveland were built before 1950. On average, they're 40% less efficient than homes built in the last 10 years. But even better insulated modern homes still lose a tremendous amount of energy simply because of their size and the huge amount of power they need.
They're going to get larger as we cross this road. They're moderate size, the kind you might see in suburbia, are still losing a substantial amount of heat energy.
All across America, inefficiencies in our homes are costing us nearly $60 billion each year. Our path takes us over new houses, older construction, industrial zones, acres of greenhouses, a nuclear power plant, and Cleveland's downtown. The city explodes in Larry's screen like an inferno.
This is a really eye-opening experience. I never saw so much heat or energy loss happening everywhere you look. But the thing that's really boggling my mind is the fact that we're wasting so much heat and energy underscores the fact that we're using massive amounts of energy to begin with.
Well, that's right. We're consumers, literally, from the time we're born to the time we die. There's no way to get around it. The amount of energy involved is spectacular.
Beginning in 1994, for the first time, American homes and offices began to consume more electricity than American industry. It's an addiction we can't seem to shake. The main electricity users are no longer aluminum smelters, steel mills, or car factories. It's you and me. To meet our energy needs, innovative pioneers are coming up with new ways to generate power in the most unexpected places.
In the heart of Vermont's dairy country, meet the new power plants at the Blue Spruce Farm. All 2,400 of them.
Okay, here we go. Time for these babies to go get milked.
All right, I'm holding my breath.
Marie Audette is a second-generation dairy farmer who doesn't let anything go to waste on her farm. But her cows produce a lot of waste, and she's found a brand new way to use it.
We used to put the raw manure back on our land as fertilizer.
Okay. So is that going to be used to make electricity too?
It sure is, baby. Go for it.
These cows produce an energy resource that you don't have to dig, drill, ship, or pipe in. But a shovel does come in handy.
It's funny, I've been going around the country learning about how we generate energy, and this is the last place I would imagine where you'd actually be making electricity.
But it turns out that manure is a valuable source of power thanks to its natural byproduct, methane gas. The manure gets collected in the barns and pumped to a nearby storage tank called a digester.
The digester's 14 feet deep, filled with 12 feet of manure, and the top 2 feet is where those methane gases collect. It's a big concrete swimming pool with a concrete cover.
The methane powers a generator, sending electricity directly onto the grid to 400 homes. It's part of a larger program called Cow Power that serves more than 3,000 customers. And unlike the ups and downs of solar and wind, these cows provide a constant source of electricity.
We're here to make milk. That's what we're good at. But as a byproduct, you know, when those cows are pooping, we're making this gas that's not a good greenhouse gas. So we're actually improving the environment while we're making electricity.
But if you're thinking in terms of the total energy needs in this country, I mean, this is barely making a dent. I mean, we have, what, 300 million Americans who are all consuming energy. How does this make a difference?
Our renewable energy needs are going to come from a variety of resources. It's not going to be one magic bullet. It's going to take all kinds of innovative ideas from all facets for us to come to a solution.
Vermont is the first state with a utility that's banking on cow power. But it doesn't come cheap. Customers have to pay a premium to make up for the cost of installing the technology. The system cost Marie and her farm over $1 million, which they've paid off in just 7 years.
If this is working so well for you, how come everyone's not doing this?
Well, it takes more than just the dairy farmer to get this done. We can't do it on our own. You know, the margin on milk is always kind of tight. And in order to build the facility that's needed to capture all this methane and turn it into electricity, it requires a huge capital investment. Community stepped up and say, we want to pay more for cow power. And it's become much bigger than we initially ever dreamed that it was going to be.
Let's face it, we're not going to run the country on cow power alone. It would take more than 4 million cows to equal the output of just one nuclear power plant. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point here is that the people in this community are taking control of their energy choices, and they're choosing to build a sustainable energy future 1 kilowatt at a time.
And it's not just happening in Vermont. All across the country, communities are taking greater control of where their electricity comes from and how it's being used. And that brings me to Florida Avenue Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. Pastor Earl Trent and his congregation are turning to solar energy. They've got their own power plant up on the church roof.
This is the entire system. There are 44 of them, and it's very, very basic and very simple. When people think about solar power system, they're thinking about something complicated. But as you see, they're just angled panels. Sun hits them, and then it turns into current.
Unlike massive solar arrays that can generate electricity for thousands of people, the church's system is pretty modest, but it saves them $400 a month. It represents a small but growing trend that's changing how we get our power. Over the last 2 years, more than 100,000 families have installed solar panels throughout America.
This is only the first step in a green ministry. It's going to be an education about energy efficiency, renewable energy, and conservation.
The system cost $60,000 to put in and would have been out of reach without government subsidies and donations from church members. You can't realistically expect that everyone in your congregation is going to put up a solar panel, right? So, I mean, what are you trying to do here?
What we're trying to do is change their thinking so that they will become more energy efficient in their own homes. This is a catalyst, and that's what we want. You know, this is a start.
The fact is, finding innovative ways to power the grid is still a work in progress. But my travels across America have shown me that there's a new energy awareness that's starting to take hold, and it's revealing itself in surprising ways. Which takes me full circle back to where my journey began. You might not know it by looking around this racetrack, but even NASCAR is trying to make a dent in its energy consumption. In Pennsylvania, they've built the largest solar-powered sports facility in the world. And the gasoline they're using? In 2011, for the first time, all their cars began running on an experimental blend of 15% corn ethanol to offset their fossil fuel use. NASCAR has a long way to go, but they want to be racing 100 years from now. To do this, they know they're going to have to make some fundamental changes, just like the rest of us. And it's not just here. Keeping the power flowing will take creative solutions. We need to find new sources of energy for tomorrow, and we need to use existing ones more efficiently today. There are no easy answers, but there are a lot of new ideas out there ready to be harnessed.
But today is race day in Daytona. That means it's time to put pedal to the metal and celebrate the great American energy machine.
It's a machine we depend on every day. To keep it going, we can't take it for granted. America Revealed is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.